Cartesian dualism arose from Descartes' claim that he could doubt the experience of physical objects, including his own body, but not the existence of his thoughts or thinking. Although Descartes' words about possible interactions of mind and body, Cartesian dualism evolved into an epistemological tradition that separates the mind separated the mind as rational thinking, immaterial and private from the body as an irrational, corrupt and physical substance that merely provided public, physical and exertion of the material world. This bifurcation of the person into mind and body has subsequently given rise to many other dualisms, including subjective as opposite to objective, knowledge as opposed to experience, reason as opposed to feeling, theory as opposed to practice, and verbal as opposed to non-verbal. Cartesianism has also led to the romantic view of the body as the last bastion of what is natural, unspoiled, preconceptual, and primitive in experience. Bodily movement is viewed as behavior with little relevance to language, thought, or consciousness, and not as meaningful action. The Western tradition since Descartes has generally assumed that the body is a solid object, and the self, in particular the mind, is an ethereal subject mysteriously infused into the body object. Throughout history, the mind has been modeled as a series of different material objects: a hydraulic machine, a telephone switchboard, an hologram, a digital computer. Cognitive science as an interdisciplinary research enterprise becoming in the 50s, with the rise of the mind is a computer metaphor, which resulted from technological advances in computing machinery. Alan Turing outlined a method for assessing the question, can machines think? Following Descartes' footsteps, Turing emphasized the importance of drawing a fairly sharp line between a person's physical capacities and his/her intellectual abilities. Turing asked us to consider a scenario that included three people: a man, a woman, and an interrogator of unspecific sex. The interrogator was in a separate room from the man and the woman, and the interrogator task was to determine which of the two was a man and which was a woman on the basis of the writer's written answer to certain questions. Example: what is the length of your hair? It is a task to confuse the interrogator, be asked to help. The task proper comes into play by swapping the man with a machine. If the interrogator makes the same set of judgments, deductions and guesses after the sharp as before, the interrogator is able to distinguish the machine answers from the man's answers. Then the machine has passed to the Turing test. The machine whose behavior indistinguishable from the intellect of the man in the machine that thinks. Cognitive science models of intelligent human activity have mostly continued to assume, like Turing, that cognition is autonomous, logical, and disembodied. In his theory of cognitive science, Gardner, 85, claimed that the exclusion of the body was in fact a vain methodological decision. Thought mainstream cognitive science do not necessarily bear any animus against the effective realm, against the context that surrounds any actor of thought, or against historical or cultural analysis. In practice, they attempt to factor out these elements to the maximum extent possible. This may be a question of practically if one were to take into account this individualizing and phenomenalistic elements. Cognitive science might well become impossible. Some cognitive scientists question whether the exclusion of the phenomenological body, along with other aspects of experience such as emotions and consciousness, is merely a methodological issue and not really constitutive of what cognitive science believes in essential about cognition. Of course, many scholars now try to avoid the strict separation of mind and body assumed by Cartesian dualism. The most popular strategy, especially in recent decades, has been to reduce mental events to brain processes and replacing internal explanations with instrumental ones. In some cases, the reduction of mind to brain carries with the reduction of body to brain. Neuroscience, for instance, seldom acknowledge to the role played by the body as a whole in the cognitive operation of the brain. The body is reduced to its representation in the somatosensory cortex, and it's considered important only to the extent that it provides the raw sensory input required for cognitive computations. In other cases, the body is first reduced to the mind and then reduced to the brain. This is especially true in psychology, where the body is first treated as an intentional object, an image and mental representation, and then reduced to neural computations. Contemporary philosophers argue over whether a physical body is necessary for knowledge and cognition, often by considering the implications of different thought experiments in which the mind may be divorced from critical aspects of bodily experience. For instance, consider the following scenario. Imagine a brilliant neuroscientist named Mary, who has lived her entire life in a room that is rigorously controlled to display only various shades of black, white, and gray. She learns about the outside world by means of black-white television monitors, and being brilliant, she manages to transcend these obstacles. She becomes the world's greatest neuroscientist, all from within this room. In particular, she comes to know everything there is to know about the physical structure and activity of the brain and its visual system, of its actual and possible states. Schurland, 85. Philosophers are, based on examples like the above, over where qualia, the phenomenal character of our experience, shows us one's subjective sensation of color, must be mental states that are causally related to the neurophysiologic neurophysiology of the brain. These scenarios, however, dramatically fail to recognize the need for a real living body in knowing about the world. There is no acknowledgement of Mary as a living person made of flesh, blood, and bone, how moves and was awareness of the felt qualities of her own actions. Mary's first-person experience of her own body in relation to environment provide knowledge, and it's qualitatively incommensurate with whatever may be happening in her own brain or anyone else. Mary learns about qualia because she subjectively experiences them through her own bodily actions. Knowledge of a set of abstract propositions such as Mary's understanding of the neurophysiology of color vision means nothing unless a person experiences in some embodied sense the physical world to which these propositions refer. Cognitive psychologists, like many philosophers, often fail to recognize the significance of embodied action in the study of human mental life. Most experimental investigations of perceptions and cognitions occur in laboratory situations where a person passively observes stimuli and then responds in some specified manner to what has been presented. In some instances, the person is physically restricted in his or her movements. Head rests are used in psychophysical experiments. In cases where the participant must move to respond to stimuli, such as having to push a button to speak aloud, physiologists work hard to eliminate the movement from the theoretical understanding of the process involving in perception and cognition. Cognitive processes, especially, are viewed as strictly mental phenomena that have little to do with embodied experience. The body is the vessel for the mind and brain, but has negligible importance in characterizing the essence of mental life. However, the situation is now changing. Consider just 3 examples of how psychologists now pay attention to embodied action when studying different cognitive phenomena. First, the classic empirical work on mental imagery investigates possible correspondence between mental imagery and visual perception. For example, participants in one classic study were presented with 2-dimensional drawings of pair of 3-dimensional objects. Participants' task was to determine whether the 2 represented objects were identical except for orientation. Some of the figures required rotation solely within the picture plane, whereas others requires rotation deep into the page. The general result was that whether for 2 or 3-dimensional rotation, participants seemed to rotate the object mental at fixed rate approximately 60 degree seconds. For many years, psychologists assumed that cognitive abilities such as those observed in mental rotation studies demonstrate the tight link between visual perceptions and mental imagery. Although numerous studies examine people's kinetic and motor imagery, scholars traditionally have not researched for explicit relations between kinesthetic activity and mental imagery. However, recent work suggests that many aspects of visual and motor imagery share a common representational and possibly neurophysiological substrate. Various studies demonstrate that the ability to transform mental images in linked to motor process so that rotating one's hands in the direction opposite to the required mental rotation slow down the speed of mental rotation. Researchers now claim that visual motor anticipation is the engine that drives mental rotation. Under this view, similar mechanisms drive both visual image transformation and the production of embodied movement. The ability to plan movements as visualized actions and not as actual motor plans may be the common element underlying embodied actions and mental imaginary performance. These new developments in cognitive psychology illustrate how correcting for a previous neglect of embodied experience in experimental studies leads to a richer picture of the importance of embodiment in human cognition.